on that thing.
Good morning and welcome to Stories by Grandma. Today's story is one that I have written about an adventure that I had in searching for family history. In 1985, my family took a trip to Nebraska from Arkansas, and we went up to visit my relatives in Nebraska to find some family information. My Aunt Doris Skinner drove us around to several cemeteries in the area, and we went to the Bethel Cemetery in Carlton, Nebraska, where I have 6 generations of my family buried. She mentioned that there was a lilac bush over in the one section of the cemetery, and she said that I had relatives buried there. So my husband, the curious man that he is, decided to climb inside the lilac bush to see if he could find any stones. Well, he found 3 stones. One was labeled Ida B, one was labeled Archie B, and one was labeled Abby B. I knew of Ida and I knew of Archie, but I did not know anything about an Abby. So I had guessed that she was maybe an infant of David and Elizabeth Beanblossom, who were the owners of the plot in the cemetery. Fast forward to 2009, we were coming back from Utah, visiting the grandchildren in Utah, and we were driving down Highway 81, which runs down the eastern side of Nebraska. We decided that it was near the cemetery, so we would stop in and just visit our relatives buried there. As we drove into the cemetery, things looked normal, as it should be. But wait, all of a sudden I noticed that the lilac bush was gone. What had happened to the lilac bush and the stones that were inside of it?
We are in the Carlton Cemetery. We think where Gail is standing is where the bush was, because looking at our old picture, the roundy top thing is there, and in that picture there's a couple of big square things there and some little angled pieces behind it. And over on this side of the picture we have that we can see that statue, that older rounded top, and that short square thing next to it, and that shows up in the old picture. And of course anything that would be straight ahead from where I'm shooting you couldn't see because the bush would have been in the way. But this lines up exactly with the old picture we've got. And you said what? Who was buried where?
My grandparents are right there.
Okay, so right close to it. Okay, here's Beanblossoms and Skinner's. So the Skinner graves
Standing right in front of some Holsingers.
and the Beanblossom thing.
Look at that one.
And here's a Holsinger grave.
And inside that other bush is Alexander and Sarah.
So there's more Holsingers in the stuff in that bush. So it makes sense then that where you're standing would be more of the clan.
Right.
And where the bush was and where nothing is now. So we can...
Oh my goodness. So when I got home, I contacted the church where the cemetery was located and asked them if they knew anything about the stones being removed and the lilac bush being removed and what had happened to the stones that were in there. I had even sent them photographs of the stones that we had taken while we were there in 1985. Well, they contacted me back and said that they knew nothing of anybody being buried in those plots, and that the plots belonged to David and Elizabeth Beanblossom and William Smith Beanblossom. There was 2 plots side by side, and the lilac bush was dividing the 2 plots. So I still didn't know who Abby was. We had no idea what happened to the stones, so I was perplexed. I waited for a few years, and in 2012, I discovered Abby on a census record, and she was listed not as an infant, but as the oldest child of a William Smith Beanblossom. Aha! William Smith Beanblossom, the one who had the plot next to David's in Bethel Cemetery. So we decided that we would take and buy some new markers and place on there, because David had never had a marker made there, my great-grandfather, had never had a marker placed, so we purchased two markers, one for David and one for all the children. We listed Abby as an infant because at that time we did not know that she was an infant and that she was a child or an older child. And we went ahead and placed the stones in there anyway. By mistake, I had put her as an infant on the stone. She was not an infant. She was born, well, she died in 1892, and she was 17 years old. So you can do the math and find out that she was not a baby. And she was buried in that cemetery. So we knew who Abby was. But now I've got to come up with a new stone, and she will get her own when I replace the stones. I will make a new one for the children and for Abby. I have 6 generations buried in that cemetery, as I already said, and the 6 generations are Alexander and Sarah Tobias Holsinger, my great-great-grandparents, the parents of Elizabeth Holsinger Beanblossom, who was married to David. David is buried there. He is my great-grandfather, and he is Alexander and Sarah's son-in-law. My grandparents, Fred and Emma Beanblossom, are buried there. Fred is the son of David Beanblossom, and they are my grandparents. Doris, that took us to the cemetery, is their daughter, Fred and Emma's daughter, and she is buried there with her husband, Dale Skinner. And they have a daughter buried there, Connie Jolene Skinner, who is my cousin. And they have a granddaughter buried there who is Lisa Jolene Blau, and she is my second cousin. My husband and I plan on being buried there as well when we pass on. We were told by the cemetery that there is plenty of room in W.S. Beanblossom's plot that we can be buried there, so we will. The photos are the only thing that we have that prove the children were buried in the cemetery. If it hadn't been for those photographs, we would never have known anything about Abby, probably. And by using these photographs, we knew exactly where to place the new stones. This is the end of my story. We will see you next time. And thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.